Okay. Oh, I see everything. We are live on LinkedIn.
Hit go live.
Cool. Hello, everyone. We're almost there with the Q3 API Security Report. We now call it ThreatStats. And I'm here today with Chris Merritt, Head of Product Marketing at Wallarm. Please introduce yourself.
Hey, everybody. Glad you're here. Looking forward to talking about our threat stats report with you. Give us a few minutes, let a few more folks enter the room, and we'll kick this thing off. In the meantime, let us know where you're dialing in from. Always interested to know where in the world people are joining us from.
Yeah, and for everyone who joined on LinkedIn, we do have two different streams in the parallel. We have one on LinkedIn. Feel free to ask your questions directly there. And we have another one stream here on Zoom. Feel free to connect using the link. And if you don't know where to find a link in Zoom, it's right there in the comments on LinkedIn stream. Also feel free to share Zoom link and LinkedIn links with your friends and colleagues who will be interested in API security. And to answer the most usual questions, so we will share the recording and the deck right after the event, plus the recording will be available on LinkedIn right after this event. So technically we will see, you will be able to watch this recording right after. We officially started. There is a right on time. Here at the almost, I mean, how many of us? 20 people altogether who joined right on time. I see like 15 here now on Zoom, and I see at least 15 on LinkedIn. So it's just like a couple of seconds before the official launch. So I just wait for a couple of minutes to get more people. And for everyone who just joined, feel free to share from where you connected. We really need to know that, and just curious how good is our marketing outreach in the world coverage all through. And again, feel free to share the link with your friends and colleagues who are interested in API security space. We don't have any limits of how many people can listen to us.
Yeah, and the big advantage to being in the live meeting is you get to ask questions as we're going through things. So we obviously have a slide deck for you all to follow along, and we'll be sharing a lot of data with you. But you know, where it gets really interesting is getting into your questions about what we found for Q3 and how we think that might impact your API security program. So looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. And again, we did a really big job to analyze every single exploit that somehow mentioned during the CVE and bug bounty reports, to categorize them and split by risks, and then prepare the data that we're going to present today. By the way, I see 20 plus 20 on LinkedIn and Zoom, means that 40 of us together online simultaneously. That's just a great stats. Let's hit 100. So feel free to share with friends and colleagues who will be interested in API security. And I guess that we're almost ready to go. Okay, let's start, Chris.
Yeah, great. Well, so welcome everyone for the third webinar on our API vulnerabilities and exploits report. With this quarter, we've renamed it to the Threat Stats Report to more accurately reflect the depth and breadth of what we're looking at. Before we get started with the introduction and all of that, I'd like to push a poll question very quickly. If Rick, you could run that for us, that'd be awesome. I don't know what if that pops up over or how that works.
Yeah, for everyone who connect on Zoom, you will see this pop up right in your Zoom panel in the same window.
There we go.
Yeah, so if you think that you can get it.
So you should see it pop up, and we're really asking, what do you think is the most concerning or biggest risk area from the OWASP Top 10 APIs, API Security Top-10? So give us your thoughts on that, and of course we'll discuss that in greater depth in a little bit. So we'll leave that up for now. So let's talk about kind of the data lake that we were operating out of. We started with about 80,000. If go to the next slide, Ivan. We went to 80,000 records in Q1, 88,000 in Q2, and in Q3 we weighted our way through 100,000 different records. So big job to go through all of that information and cull out the items that are interesting from an API perspective. So we've done a lot of, looking for needles in the haystacks. So big thanks to the team, Goran, Dinko, and Alex for their help and work at this. And then of course, you'll see a lot of beautiful graphics from Anastasia and Mike. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. If we go to the next slide, we'll look at kind of what the top level data set looks like. When we first get the data, I take a quick look at the number of vulnerabilities. You can see that in Q3, it was 203 total out of that 100,000 that we started with. That's only 16% above what we saw in Q2. And I use the word only because we saw such a huge growth between Q1 and Q2. We see a similar growth in the number of vendors impacted, and we see that the CVSS score is kind of reverting to the mean, if you will. So basically, you kind of look at that and you say, well, gosh, not much has changed, but really what once you start double clicking and you start really digging into the data, you find a lot more information in there. So let's take a quick look at that. Next slide, there we go. First double click, if you will, API vulnerabilities. We see that a large number of the vulnerabilities were in the critical and high risk. Then we see the next biggest group or the biggest group, but the next set in medium. The interesting thing about the number of vendors impacted is, of course, it grows as the number of vulnerabilities grows. So we're not seeing any particular vendor getting picked on. One vendor had 10 CVEs written against them. And of course, that depends on how people write their CVEs, right, Ivan?
All true, all true. And a couple of comments here just to put some colors on what we actually see this quarter. Definitely, there is more API vulnerabilities related to all the CVEs issued than others, and we can find that it's just like plus whatever 16%, right, in terms of the issues that we categorized as API security related. However, if you also take a look at like how many issues we analyzed, you will see that it's like basically 200 out of 100,000. It means that the portion of this API security vulnerabilities inside this CV is also getting bigger, which is good. So we actually see more issues, and that's a very important thing that API security actually became bigger and higher, and that's why we have to take a look at them. And it's not about only 200 of the issues that we categorized. It's more about like how they're dangerous. And specifically this quarter, we will aim to cover why all the basically almost every single DevOps stack now under attack or was under attack related to API security issues. Okay, what's next?
Yeah, so take it away, Ivan.
Sure. Thank you, Chris. So I just want to highlight that it's not a joke, but this quarter and usually what we do, right? So we look at this, all the exploits that we find interesting and related to API security, and trying to find the top 10, the most dangerous, the most interesting, the most impactful. This time we found 10 of them specifically related to the DevOps stack. So not just like software that's very rarely distributed, but the usual software that we use as a company, Wallarm use inside, including the GitLab and JFrog and HashiCorp console and Grafana, Casdor, Argo CD, Kubernetes itself, and Rancher. So it's not, I mean, it was never there to look through the quarter, which is a lot of issues, like 200 issues, and found 10 of them specifically, and 10 of the most impactful issues specifically related to just one topic, like a DevOps. That's why we named this ThreatStats report as a DevOps stack on the attack. Also, we found 3 of the major infrastructure issues. One was Hadoop by Apache, one issue was the F5, and one was the Fortinet that affect network devices. That what we also assigned to the same network problem and also attached to the DevOps stack somehow, but that's what we have to review today, right? So the DevOps definitely under attack specifically because of API, and it's not a surprise, at least for me as a security researcher, since every single product that we mentioned here, every single piece of the DevOps stack basically rely on APIs and use API. That's why definitely the first thing that researchers bring up to their tables related to API security, it's DevOps things. That's what we have as it for now. And then let's dig into the thing that we discovered.
So I think it's interesting also, you know, when we look at the CVSS's scores, you mentioned the 7.6 for the average, which is a high rating, right? And then we look at the network device side, and that was averaged in at 8.1% or 8.1, which is getting up into critical, right? But I think the big point that we want to make here for everybody to think about is that if you were just focused on CVSS scores, you would have missed 42% of these 12. So 5 out of 12 of these, you would not have picked up on. So, you know, be careful in designing your vulnerability, your API vulnerability management program, that you're thinking beyond just CVSS scores.
All true, Chris. And by the way, today I will explain every single exploit that you can find on this screen in detail, and during this walkthrough, probably we'll get some more interesting insights about how it works. But CVSS is usually, it's an okay thing to calculate things in average. However, it's still the case to find very dangerous exploit with a relatively low CVSS and then get them higher in the next couple of quarters. This is for sure. Okay, let's go next. The first analysis that we did as open source versus commercial products. Definitely specifically because of the API adoption, we have and usually have more open source software than the commercial software. However, it's also related to like amount of software that available for the security research. Plus, we also use the data, not only CV specifically, but also bug bounty reports, and some of the bug bounties now invest heavily in open source. That's why we have this split. So overall, it's 37 versus 62% open source versus the commercial products. And what's really important here, as roughly 87% of all the vulnerabilities examined are in DevOps enterprise hardware software, which is a very important thing. And of this, 21 fell in the DevOps subcategory, 47% in the enterprise software subcategory. That's the split inside this 37%. And again, like it's too early to say that basically open source is more vulnerable than commercial products, but in general, now this world, specifically with the DevOps, just consists of commercial product and open source product, and open source product definitely widely distributed, and that's why there's a split. And by the way, if you somehow interested in open source, we have our own open source API security product called API Firewall or API. It's available for everyone on GitHub, and we recently got 1 billion Docker pulls. Thanks everyone who used our product, and just keep going. So we definitely want to add more features next year. Okay, the next slide. So the thing that I want to cover as and actually,
Ivan, why don't we look at the poll results real quick?
Sure, let's do that.
As we address these.
Yeah, let's compare. Let's compare.
Yeah. Rick, if you could pop those up.
Okay.
All right.
I'm not surprised, but broken user authentication, we got 33% for them, and nobody voted for BOLA. So I have some good insights for you, Chris. Our audience here never look at marketing materials because they're not aware of BOLA at all. So in reality, the situation is a bit different. We have technically injections as a highest risk. What's really important about injections related to API, OWASP API Top-10 and OWASP Top-10 is you just have to know that according to OWASP Top-10, injection class here is a bit different rather than OWASP API Top-10. For instance, OWASP API Top-10 injections also consist of the cross-site scripting and server-side request forgery, unlike the SIG OWASP Top-10. And that's why we have a bit more here. But overall, every single third issue that we actually mapped this quarter specifically related to injections, which is a lot. I mean, it's not a joke that technically every third API exploit in a quarter as an injection. So we have to take care about injection first and then others. BOLA, which is the usual threat for APIs to broken object level authentication, got place number 2 or 23%. It's technically every fourth exploit could be associated with Ebola. Broken user authentication got number 3 or 17%, and broken function level authorization or API 5, it's 9%. All the rest of the things, including lack of resource limiting and the data exposure and API misconfigs and all the stuff. So altogether, it's just like 24%. So what it means for me, third time in a row since we start to crack API exploits, we get the same answer. Injections are number 1. It's not number 8, it's not even number 2, it's number 1. It's the first place third time in a row. So that's why in real world, once you build API security stack and applying API security control, you have to know about 2 different things. First of all, you have to take care about injections. In fact, you have to take care about OWASP Top-10 and OWASP API Top-10 for both legacy APIs and APIs to get the full coverage of for the API security. Chris?
Yeah, it's really interesting when you map these across each other, and I think this mapping has implications on your API vulnerability management program to really understand what's actually happening, as opposed to using some categories that have been codified, anywhere from 1 to 3 years ago, and blindly following that. Really being able to pay attention to what's actually going on in your environment and where you should be looking for vulnerabilities, I think is key to managing and mitigating these types of risks. Yeah,
all true. And here's a heat map. So, and actually it was the great idea that Chris invented last quarter to map issues we found and we categorized for not only OWASP, but also where the CWE Top-10 risk threat. And what we found that actually, as you can see here by red, orange, and the yellow color on the right, our categories actually well aligned with the CWE. We have number one for XSS, and again, XSS, by the way, also the part of injection subset. It's a subset of injection by OWASP API Top-10, and it's still the case for even modern APIs. For instance, this quarter, it's not the highest risk issues for sure, but this quarter, for instance, in Q3 last quarter, right? The WSO2 was vulnerable. A lot of other products was vulnerable. Argo CD was vulnerable for XSS, specifically related to API security. That's why you should not forget about XSS. Then we have a fast reversal, which is definitely the part of the injections as a number two. Then improper auth, which is the part of BOA and other things, and then uncontrolled resource consumption as a number four, and all the rest of the things. So what's really important here as to basically be able to apply different heat maps, different scores among the issues that we found, not only rely on OWASP, because again, OWASP API, they did it first time and it happened like almost 3 years ago, and we now want to, and we actually contribute to OWASP API research to get more and more actionable results out of there. It provides all the data we have. And by the way, if you're interested in the data source of this report, so we will publish this on the GitHub, so we don't want to hide anything that we use, and we collect one or two bring as many interesting ideas as we can, and then switch to the injection things, please.
Yeah. Well, if we go back to the other slide, just real quick, it's, you know, the top 25 most dangerous software is important. If you go, yep, there we go, is important because it's a kind of a macro view of what's going on in the environment. So MITRE and CISA have done a pretty good job of pulling this information together. Now, not all of these are applicable to APIs. So out of that list of 25, 6 of them are not applicable. Interestingly, this time we actually did see some that are generally not applicable to APIs fall out in some of the vulnerabilities that we were looking at. But I think more interesting is that out of the 203 API vulnerabilities we examined, 109 of them, or 55, almost 55%, were covered by the CWE top 25 list. So, you know, this is interesting information and does bear some effort by your team to understand, you know, how would you triage some things. So if something's covered in here, you might bump that up your list a little bit. In the data, we found 59 total unique CWEs, and that's you know, always a little bit difficult. If anybody's looked at the mapping of CWEs, the parents and childs and all that stuff, it's very complex. But it does help you understand what we were talking about on the previous slide with the OWASP is, you know, OWASP says injection, but that can, you know, involve a lot of different CWEs, which will involve different types of mitigation. So something to be thinking about. The other thing I wanted to mention real quick on that slide was that we also looked at the CISA known exploited vulnerabilities, the KEV list, and we found a couple of the Q3 vulnerabilities listed in there. So that's just another resource for you to be leveraging in your triaging and mitigation programs. So why don't we, go on to the next slide. I'll let you start. We kind of, I alluded to a lot of this, so go ahead, Ivan.
Sure. So overall, we have the major risk associated with injections, which is just one of the OWASP categories. However, inside this, we have basically a lot of different subsets. And as a security researcher, I know that injection is just like the very generic keyword that could be applied to pretty much everything. XSS is a JavaScript injection. So there are no SQL injections. There is a path reversal, which is the the file name injection. So server-side request forgery technically is an injection if we're talking about URL and some kind of like library who receives this URL, false comments or PHP. So every single syntax we have in the world potentially might cause an injection if there is any control characters or terminals or anything that's related to actually some data sets and instruction set. That's why the class is pretty broad. And here we actually split the injection class between different CWEs to give you some overview how it looks like. And I mean, it looks like pretty normal in terms of the distribution here. However, it's so many things that happen inside inside the class. Under the hood of this one problem, we have 22 different things associated with injections itself. Chris?
Yeah, exactly. So if you're looking at the OWASP list and you say, well, gosh, injections are the biggest problem. Now you have to dig into that and really understand what kinds of injections are involved in your code and what the different mitigations for each one of those are so that you can get those things closed up.
All true, all true. So don't forget about injections, and don't forget that even with this all modern API security world, you still have to take care about the generic and basics of the web issues like injections.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, so now we'll move on to the next area, next big key takeaway from our Q3 report. And as a reminder, if you have questions as we're going along, go ahead and post them. We'll try to answer them as we're going. In this slide, what we're looking at is the time to exploit from when the CVE was published to when an exploit POC was published. And the first thing we did was look at how that broke down by CVSS score. And you can see, and this is no real big surprise, right? You can see that critical risk vulnerabilities get exploited more often than high risk, which get exploited more often than medium risks. And then a little interesting this time is none of the low risk vulnerabilities got hit. But there weren't that many, if you remember on slide 2 or 3. So it's kind of interesting to be looking at that. One thing I want to make sure everyone's aware of, just because of my data visualization and statistics background, note that we've cut off the x-axis on the right side. So, those are not proportional. We just want to make sure y'all could read that. So any thoughts on that, Ivan?
No, I think that you just like covered that. What's really important for us as a researchers to look at real exploits and POCs and like the basically check if the CVE actually dangerous or not by by the only thing that does matter at the end of the day, like the way how to exploit that. However, it's not that as from my point of view, it's not that often to get the POC right when the CVE actually published. However, we have the cases, and it seems like it accelerates specifically because of bug bounties, because like it's just impossible to get any reward if you not applied exploit or POC and everything that the other side can basically check. That's why we see more and more exploitable things, and it's actually I'm glad to see this, since we now can test the tools and controls and API security solutions in place to get if it's actually provide any protection against this stuff or not. And okay, the next one.
So as Patrick noted, that first slide did not show the time to exploit, but that was lead into this slide. Now this slide, the visualization may be a little difficult, but let me walk you through it. What we saw was a range of about 300 days, from about 190 days before the CVE was released. We saw several POCs being published, all the way out to 112 days after the CVE was published. So on average, overall, the CVEs that were exploited, you had 0 days. Basically, on the day that the CVE was released, you could expect that there would be an exploit. Now that's on average. So we broke that down a little bit further. 40% of the POCs were released ahead of the CVE. And they were released on an average of 28 days before the CVE was published. Now, as I say, that ranged from minus 189 days to 0 day, but that gives you an idea of how vulnerable you really are if you're not paying attention not only to the CVEs, but also to published POC reports.
Yeah, that's a good point, by the way, for all the threat intelligence folks who try to actually distribute by CVEs. So in a real case, we have like almost every second exploit related to actually available before an official CVE comes. So we have to take care of that, specifically when it comes to the API security. And what's really unique about this POCs and API security things, it's APIs initially designed to be used and as a result to be exploited if it comes to the security issues. That's why we see so many things that actually exploited and then categorized and officially recorded as CVEs.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting also to start breaking that down. You see that 21% of the vendors were impacted by these vulnerabilities. We see that a majority of these POCs were published against DevOps tools. So take what Ivan was talking about earlier to heart, because it does matter, right? We see that about 80% of these published POCs hit open source software. So again, different ways of cutting the data to try to get some insight into what your API vulnerability management program should be looking like. And it's also interesting that this is a very different timeline than what we saw in Q2, which is the first quarter we started tracking exploits, and we'll continue doing so into the future. And finally, of course, a warning, right? This only covers the known bad, right? The POCs that get published, right? What about the unknown POCs that are out there or the ones that don't get published, right? The unknown unknowns, right? So
exactly, and one days, because it's still the case for the researchers to just get official CVE and try to reverse what's going on, and then basically create an exploit based on the number. That's why I have to, take significant attention to this 47% of published POCs after whatever 40 plus days after the official CVE, because we know only what we know. It's still the case to get just a CVE and a version number, reverse and make one-day exploit, which is not covered by this report because we just don't have this data.
Yep, exactly. So, you do have to be, what we're basically learning here is that you have to be Johnny on the spot. When you hear about an issue, you don't have a lot of time to put it on the back burner. You've got to get on it. So,
okay. So this is the last part of this thing. Let's discuss exploits finally, right? So we found and finished the statistic things. By the way, if you enjoyed this data, feel free to download this report and all the other reports that we prepared, Q1 and Q2 reports. It's available at wallarm.com/resources, or find the resources on the menu on the top. And here we go. So the last part of this event today, I just want to go through exploits one by one and to basically look at what do we have there.
before you get into the meat of it, let's really quickly address the issue of how you can design your API vulnerability management program. There's many ways to slice the cake, as we've been discussing. We've talked about CVSS scores. We've talked about the CWE top 25 most dangerous software, et cetera. So one way lots of people do it is based on the frequency of vulnerabilities against a particular vendor or particular product. That is obviously, if you have that product in your environment, then that's obviously important. But if we then look at the next slide, we could also be doing it by the CVSS scores, and you see an awful lot of different products in here. Another way of doing it is by ranking them. So when MITRE and CISA come up with their top 25 list, CWEs, they do a normalized ranking based on frequency and severity. And that's certainly legit, and we can see what that comes out with on the next slide. And of course, our friends at First have come up with an approach where they take not only the likelihood of a vulnerability being or arising, but they're looking at how can you prognosticate or forecast which ones are likely to be exploited. So that's something that could also, feed into your vulnerability management program. The bottom line is it's different strokes for different folks, right? I mean, your VM program has to address your specific situation. And I think the other warning, and this is, I want to let Ivan take over now, is really don't forget your internal APIs as well. So anything to add to that, Ivan?
All true. I completely agree with you in everything. So first of all, there's so many ways how to think about scoring systems and how to think about priorities. However, at the end of the day, you have a lot of chance to be compromised because of internal APIs and products that you introduced, specifically because of the DevOps, mainly because of the tools like GitLab or Jenkins that basically you have to install and then you have to care about them. That's why it's very important to protect such tools using some sort of API security solutions inside a system, inside the network, and not only take care about public APIs. So, and here we have the detailed research of this exploit that specifically associated with API security score, the Q3 2022. I have 12 of them, and I will start with the first one, was the GitLab. And again, like if you have some interesting idea how to slice the data or which other analysis that we have to make next quarter, just feel free to share on LinkedIn or Zoom chat, and Q&A will be really, we'll really appreciate any feedback on how we can analyze the data better next time. Okay, number one, so we decided to name this one, the CV2884, as our top 10 is our winner here. First of all, it's very interesting because this issue initially were reported to the HackerOne bug bounty system by the user called YVVDWF. So in fact, the guy got the bounty, and GitLab doing a significant job to actually work with researchers and initiate security scanning, and as a result, making the product more secure by partnership with the bug bounty platform. That's a very important thing to avoid it. Overall, what we know about that exploit, that it's remote, the remote command execution that allow an authenticated user, the authentication is required to achieve any code calls using the import object, using this import GitHub API. So we don't know, because again, it's still unpublished and full in terms of details which privileges required, probably just like guest privileges or minor privileges. That's why the score is 9.9, because definitely it requires some privileges, and the score is high. However, in fact, at least every single developer using this issue and kind of knowledge of this GitHub API will able to basically compromise an entire system, take an access to all the source code, and also run commands on this machine with a GitLab, which is an important thing. It was published in August and officially reported in 4 days after the bug bounty report and CVEs assigned in a couple of months later. Okay, what's next? Number 2 is Rancher. Rancher is probably the system that everyone knows. It's a definitely required part of the DevOps stack nowadays. And because of some issues with the credential sanitizing, the users were able to get tokens and passwords and credentials directly by API request. And actually, this issue affects cluster owners and cluster members, project owners and project members on 3 different endpoints, at least the 3 different endpoints mentioned by the Rancher team. And actually, that's very interesting how it was easy to just get the data and put in passwords and API tokens and all the other credentials just by pulling one API request. I just was surprised how it was easy to exploit Rancher and how fast researchers actually react on this. The exploit was the first mention about this exploit was in basically a year ago, and it took 1 year for the team of Rancher to finally disclose details. In fact, the CD number was assigned like a year ago. It means that they fixed that, they found that was going on and applied some kind of controls and then released a new version. And it's so critical. It was so critical for a year to don't like actually disclose what was there, and it finally happened this year. But it's relatively rare to see things like that. However, with open source, it definitely became faster since Rancher is now part of SUSE. So the guys actually proceed using this responsible disclosure things. The number 3 is Argo CD. It's again very interesting bug. Basically, because of the improper certificate validation of the Argo CD, it was possible to connect like malicious means any OpenID connect provider and basically get authentication. So that's very funny thing that once you implement a lot of things like single sign-on and OpenID and this like the basically security protocols and controls, you have to check carefully if the provider and the mechanism implemented the right way. Otherwise, you will see things like that. It was basically possible to bypass authentication with the Argo CD using single sign-on things and custom OpenID provider with any certificate that was missed. So once you implement OpenID, don't forget to check the certificate. Otherwise, you will get issues like that. And I feel now more comfortable to work with Argo CD since some kind of like things like that already resolved. So number 4 is a CASDO. The CASDO also very let's say usual software in a DevOps stack, and you can find the Go and the Gopher logger here. The thing as they just forgot to filter the file name. As a result, it was possible to upload any arbiter file, and an official exploit basically consists of just like HTML page. However, it also was possible to exploit an arbitrary web shell, and as a result, cause remote code execution. So it's super easy to find the root cause of this issue. If you have a file upload API endpoint, take care about file name validation and the content validation as well, which is important to get your upload done. And that's how this exploit work. It was super easy to just like push this // and // fast reversal thing to upload an arbiter file like this. And it was definitely easy to replace flag.html to webshell.gsp and get the full control of the server. And then Grafana, it's number 5 here. And actually, you probably also get notified about the Grafana, some other issues with Grafana. And it's actually, this is the 3rd quarter in a row when we see more and more Grafana issues. Some I mean, Grafana is a modern software and it's super, let's say, well distributed, super usual for nowadays to use the Grafana. And under the some of the conditions, it was possible to basically bypass authentication and taken over the Grafana users with a couple of requirements that definitely was easy to meet. First of all, it was required to use OAuth with Grafana, which is the case for so many instances. Then you have to know user name or email of target user, which is obvious. We usually attack admin or usernames we know, right? And then email and user ID of the attacker shouldn't be associated with Grafana account, which is also obvious because if you have an access, you have an access. If you don't have an access, you have to use exploits and get an access like this. The official release was in May, and then 2 months later, we got the some kind of details in July, some kind of report of how to use that. I believe that this exploit definitely more than 7.5 in CVSS score. Probably next quarter we will see more and more instances with Grafana because it's an open source software. Not everyone updating them right on time. We will see more and more exploitations in the wild, and as a result, probably CVSS score will be a bit upgraded. And by the way, Chris, probably since next time we'll also have to track the CVSS upgrades and downgrades and explain at the year perspective how does the CVSS ups and downs went through the API experts we have, because this velocity can instantly bring us to the point that we have to predict things in a bit different way. Even if it's less 7, probably next quarter will be 9. Take care about that. So the next one is HashiCorp Console. So I think that everyone knows Console. It's basically the heart of authentication management for the modern development stack, specifically Kubernetes. In fact, during some internal test, which is an important because this issue was discovered by itself HashiCorp team. So kudos to them. They researched their own product and find significant issue and then actually explain this to others. And it happened in just like in right timeline, where they found a way how to basically runs very specific attack related to auto config request and then cause denial of service of the console. So definitely the shutting down of console is the high risk, and the 7 by CVSS is very, let's say, as it for me, it's the applicable number and very realistic. Issue number 7.
We go back and look at Ivan. If we go back and look at that very quickly, here
Sure.
again we see where the CVE was created in 2021. It wasn't published until basically a year later. So again, from a vulnerability management perspective, if you're in charge of the API security program or you're concerned about it, you have to be paying attention to signals beyond just the CVE being published.
All true. And again, that happened because the issue was found by HashiCorp team. The vendor decided to postpone with the official release. And the same as we already saw with this Rancher thing. So the SUSE team discovered that or reported by that, and they postponed this for a year. And that's kind of like old-fashioned way how to proceed with the things. 1 year responsible disclosure, etc. thing. By the way, I'm just curious how many unpublished CVEs we still have in place. I'm just like, will be super interested in the review because my bet is we will see a lot of them from 19 still, which is unclear to where it assigned. And that's just like very interesting analysis, right? Let's do that next time as well. Not specifically to APIs, but in general, how many is this like hidden bombs we have there and how many CVEs unpublished still available. Okay, next one is the GitLab as well. It's a bit different bug, the CVSS score 5. I can't agree with that, but the official response, it's basically super unclear. In the fact, unknown part of component, unknown inputs, leads some like privilege escalation, and as a result, what we know as it's for now about this GitLab issue, by the way, also reported like a year ago, and only after a year officially presented, it was like the GitLab doesn't restrict or incorrectly restrict access to the resource from authentication actor. It means like pretty much everything. So, right, so authenticated actor means just like no auth for everything. In fact, this issue only related to the feature of changing labels. It's a typical broken authorization for the function, and the function just change label of the description. So it's relatively minor feature of the GitLab as well. However, if the GitLab designed in this way to allow at least potentially somebody with no authentication, and because of that authorization getting access to one feature, probably they have many others. And we saw these features and functions vulnerable to such things previous quarter and Q1 as well. And by the way, we recently published an article like a quarter of GitLab API vulnerabilities. You can read this article on our blog. The GitLab under the research almost all the time, because they pay for issues and their bug bounty program actually stimulate researchers to find more and more issues, and as a result make the better product, which is a good thing to do. This is for sure good initiative for GitLab and kudos for the GitLab team. So my favorite one, to be honest, is the Kubernetes core sync or kube API server. Somehow it's only 5 by CVSS, however, definitely more than that, because this is server-side request forgery issues that allow to forward clients' API servers credential to third parties. It means that you can just put the URL to this kube API server, and by the way, it's not that easy to upgrade your Kubernetes. So if you once did that, you know that it's like significant job that you have to do. And in fact, if this API server somehow labeled for an attacker, it could be your internal attacker, it could be somebody who connected to the VPN or whatever you have there, or just like some other servers that can communicate to the kube API server. In fact, you can just put the one URL in one parameter in this API endpoint. As a result, the server will send the request to this URL with all the credentials they need to authenticate the API server client, and that's it. With these credentials, you can do whatever you want. Is it for me? It's definitely not 5, and my bet is the score of this issue will be upgraded in a couple of whatever months, weeks, when the community finally realized what was there. It's a relatively new exploit discovered, at least CD created in September 9th, and then in 7 days publicly reported kind of generate things. So Kubernetes is open source things. We probably can research, and I'm sure exploits exist. So it's not something that's possible to hide. And as it for me, it's very important. However, we now have to align issues by CVSS. That's why it's only number 5, but it's my personal favorite thing. First of all, it's untrivial. Secondly, it's specifically related to server-side request forgery, which I'm with a small team invented, whatever, 8 years ago. JFrog, the next one. So JFrog also very usual software, you probably know IT Factory. And it's a wide range of vulnerable versions that basically expose sensitive data by project administrator REST API. So, and the risk is 4.9, most likely because it requires authentication that's not easy to get. However, it's just like good to know that nobody is perfect. And if you have a JFrog, probably have to take care about this issue as well, specifically if you arrange the discovered here. We don't know much about this issue, but take care about the JFrog instances you have, since developers have an access to that, and it's so much sensitive data inside there. Okay, thing number 10, it's Hadoop. That one is just like the most legacy API security vulnerability we found. We categorize this quarter. The Hadoop used kind of like command line, untar, or unpack tool that use the file name as is. Because of that, they just run bash script, and because of that, you can basically push some comments, and as a result, call any other shell command by attackers string. So that's definitely from 19th. However, that's very dangerous because Hadoop is also widely distributed, and almost all the time when Hadoop is available, developers or people there can also upload files, and because of that, they basically take the control of the instance, because the shell commands means everything you want, right? And it also affects Apache Spark if there is a SQL command called @chief is available. So the official score is 9.8, and we know why, because it's direct command injection there, and probably ordinary users can run this function with unpack things. And again, that's another one example how dangerous could be legacy issues, including the star thing, because like when probably the first time when I saw web exploit, it was exactly that exploit, but it was in whatever 1999 probably. So, and another one is a Fortinet, the very well-known network header and the particular exploit for FortiDDoS. API allow attacker to basically sign API keys. And by the definition and by this description, it's not that easy to get what specifically happened, but I will explain that if you have an access to any Fortinet or FortiDDoS device, you can extract the encryption key and then encrypt any single GVT token you want across all the devices. So it means that basically the key, the secret key is not a secret. If you have one device, you can take the control for all the rest of the devices in the world. That's what happened. And definitely the key should be unique. However, because of this issue, we know that for the FortiDOS devices, they just hard-coded one key for all the devices across the world. And it's just nuts. It's almost the same as the hard-code password, but in a different form. And again, that's another one good example how new things like GVT and this cozy API authentication stuff basically could be vulnerable for whatever 100 years old exploits and issues like hard-coded keys and stuff. And the last one that we have to cover is F5, a vulnerability that cover the SOAP thing. SOAP, the, let's say, old-fashioned API protocol based on XML, and we usually expect to see XML external entities or issues like that. That probably was there a while ago, and now we have the usual authorization bypass by when the guest role user, right, the guest user can exploit the SOAP protocol, and because of that, cause some actions with the system. We don't know details. Most likely it's minor and there is no sensitive data or there is no any particular impact. However, at least the denial of service for the device is possible, and that's why we have the 6.5 CVSS score, because the damage is definitely material. And again, even if it's possible to disable or shut down the F5 big IP device by sending this authentication API request, it's still material, it's still dangerous, and it's still risky across the world. That's what we have to care about. So I hope it was interesting to review exploits. We have plenty of them here, and then probably just sum up. First of all, we almost right on time. Thanks everyone who joined us today. Feel free to share the video and recording across your network. That's very important for us to make the data that we collect as widely available as we only can. And again, you still have a chance to ask any questions. Feel free to ask on LinkedIn or Zoom. We will be happy with Chris to address them.
Yeah, give us your questions. I've seen a few come by. Hopefully we've answered them as we've been going along. We've got a couple of minutes left. I think one question I saw zoom by was around exploits how can one use that information in one's vulnerability management program is kind of the gist of what was being asked. Do you have any advice, Ivan, on how security folks could use that information in triaging and managing, mitigating
Oh,
API
sure.
vulnerabilities?
First of all, you have to check if your current program covers these 12 things, at least these 12 things that we mentioned today. If so, check which controls was applied, and then it's just a good thing to know what was dangerous during the quarter and check how you react on that. If not, fix something to be actually more prepared next time. That's how it should be. And also, if you have some API security controls, it's now easy to check if these controls cover things that we mentioned, including injections and legacy stuff and exploits that we recently, and basically a couple of minutes ago, explained, and everything the rest. It's just like very important. And I think that it's also the good thing to look at this, the main three things that we mentioned today. That first of all, infrastructure is under attack. DevOps tools vulnerable for API exploits. You have to protect them. It means that you have to cover internal tools that you implemented by API security solutions. And then injections is still the most dangerous threat. Every single third thing we detected this quarter actually related to injections. And then a lot of exploits actually comes early on or almost the same day as CVEs. Don't rely on threat intelligence reports only. Be sure that you have right proactive controls applied, including threat prevention controls for your APIs. Any other questions?
Yeah, I think that's it. And we're right at the top of the hour. So if you have any follow-on questions, you can go ahead and email us. That'd be great. We're always here to help. Before we wrap up or sign off, want to invite everybody to join the API security community on LinkedIn. We do a lot of the publishing of this information there. So go ahead and join us. There's about 1,700 people following the news and contributing there. So that'd be great to have your thoughts and contributions there as well. As Ivan mentioned, we have our reports and white papers up in the resources section of our website. Feel free to go up there and download the Q3 and Q2 reports. We just published the Q3 report this morning, or the infographic for the report this morning. And as a reminder, everyone will be getting a copy of both the slide deck and the video. And later next week, or, it is Thanksgiving here in the US, so it might be a little bit late, but we'll be sending out the full report, which if you attended our event last quarter, is filled with a lot more information. So thanks again for joining us. We're 1 minute past the hour, so we'll let you go. And thanks again for your time.
Yeah, and don't forget to look at the Wallarm product itself. We, as I said before, have a free tier for $500,000 requests a month for everyone who want to introduce to the API security. Feel free to run and install. There is completely free with almost entire feature set available for everyone. And if you need any other enterprise grade features or a demo, just feel free to book at wallarm.com or ask us at request.com. And see you soon. In a couple of weeks, we will have another one event related to the feature set and specifically related to how Wallarm can help with API security. Follow us on LinkedIn at Wallarm page and LinkedIn Security Community, API Security Community Group, and see you next time in a couple of weeks.
Great.
Thanks,
See you
everyone.
later.
Bye.